Many of you know that I've been studying my genealogy, and I have met my white G relatives who now live in Louisiana, and there are others that are still in Leake County, Mississippi. So it's been a very intriguing journey, and I'm meeting relatives, and we're developing a rapport and trust, and it's really been an interesting process and enjoyable. It's got its painfulness, but enjoyable because I'm meeting great people. I wanted to take the discussion that I've been having with my cousin John, who's white, to the next level by having his daughter and my daughter in the studios. Now, what's very interesting about them is that John's daughter, Meg, is white, of course, and my daughter, Lexi, is black, of course. But what's really interesting is that both of these women are descendants of Reuben Joshua Gee, who was the Gee plantation slave owner. He owned that plantation. Now, Reuben was married to a woman named Aurelia, and he had a whole white family through her. But he also had a black slave named Venus, who was my great-great-great-grandmother. Her son Henderson is my granddad's granddad. So he had two families. He had his white children who lived on the plantation, and he had his biracial son who either lived on the plantation or, according to some of the census records I found, right next door. But these two women, Meg and Lexi, are descendants of the women in Reuben's life, Aurelia and Venus. This brings up an interesting dynamic between black and white women, and I rarely hear people talk about those dynamics. We talk often about race relations among children and men or in the workplace, but white woman to black woman, and it's torrid, it's long, it's complicated. We're going to get into that a little bit today. Even when the suffrage movement began, and it was influenced, according to some historians, by what was happening with the movement for the abolition of slavery, that it somehow informed the work of suffrage and getting women full rights. But even when white women engaged in that work, they didn't bring black women along. Even in the feminist movement, it gave great rights to white women, but it didn't offer the same to black women. And of all of the groups that benefited from affirmative action and civil rights, none benefited more in the workplace than white women. But as those doors opened, it did not extend itself, those benefits, those opportunities, those bridges to black women. So today, I have Meg and Lexi in the studio. They're going to be talking about what it means to be the descendants of the same man, but through different relationships, and speculating how that might have impacted the way black women and white women interact, even today, 170 years later. You're going to enjoy this episode. I'm in the studio today with my daughter, and then I've also got a caller in who is Meg Roy, who's in New Orleans right now, who is a cousin, who's a relative, because you've been listening to Black Like Me. I mean, come on, who hasn't? In previous segments, I've had extensive conversations with Meg's dad, John, and we discovered each other on Ancestry.com. And what's really, really interesting is that John and Meg are white, but they got a chance to meet their black family a couple years ago. I mean, totally, like, guess who's coming to dinner, right, Lexi? We went down to New Orleans and we really hit it off. And so today, John and I have talked extensively. And if you've not listened to the genealogy episodes, you really, really need to, because it'll set up this discussion today. But we're wanting to take the discussion of race relations to the next generation. And so my daughter, Lexi, and John's daughter, Meg, we're all going to be talking about race relations in Madison and what we got to do and where we've come from. And so Meg hails from New Orleans, Louisiana, but she was educated at Columbia University in New York. And so she's figuring out, she just finished grad school there about a year ago. So she's figuring out the next step. And Meg, I want to welcome you to Black Like Me. How are you doing today?
Yeah, thank you. I'm doing really great. Really excited to be talking with y'all about this. I
am too. I'm so glad that you're doing this, that you dialed in. And Miss Lexi Gee hails from Madison, Wisconsin. We've known each other, most of her life.
Wow.
And just finished up UW-Madison, and you're starting grad school this fall in library and informational sciences. And so you're going to be hitting the big league, going to school with the grown-ups this fall. How are you doing today, honey?
I'm good. I'm excited.
Good. I'm really glad that you're here. So listen, Meg, I know you know this because you've listened. Lexi, I know you've listened. You've been on the show before. I want to open up with a few black icebreakers. because in season 3, I don't want people to think that we've forgotten our roots, and so we're going to do that. And so, Meg, since you've got black relatives, we're going to ask you some of the black icebreakers.
Okay.
Don't worry, we're not going to kick you out the fam, but not getting any of them. So, Meg, let me start with you. Do you routinely have people ask if they can touch your hair?
No, I do not get that question routinely.
Really? Do you use hair oil like Dixie Peach, Royal Crown, Dippity Doo? Do you like use those kinds of oils? We call them grease. Do you use kind of grease in your hair, Meg?
No, I do not.
Lexi, how about you? Do you routinely get asked, can people touch your hair?
Yes, I do.
Really? Do you put oil in your hair?
I did when I was little. I haven't in a long time.
Yeah, Mom would slick that stuff down. I've seen you in a tornado and that hair didn't move. Oh my goodness! I've got to ask my famous grits question. So, Meg, you're a Southerner. Are you a grits person, a cream of wheat person? What's your pleasure?
Grits aren't really my thing. But I'm Southern, but I think when it comes to food, I usually stick with my Cajun roots, like boudin and sometimes couscous. Stuff like that is
Gotcha.
more
Okay.
my
More
taste.
thing. No, that's good. That's good. We got to try that when we're down there next. How about you, Lexi? Couscous or grits in the morning?
I'm definitely a grits person.
Who cooks the grits at your house on Saturday mornings?
You do?
Oh, gotcha. And so do you put butter and sugar on your grits, or do you put salt? How do you?
I put both.
Really?
Salt and sugar, yeah.
Okay, I got you. Hey, Meg, this might be a Southern thing, so I'm going to see. Have you ever referred to one of your aunts as TT? Because it's kind of like a nickname for auntie. So I'm curious, like, do you have a TT Betty or a TT Penelope? Do you refer to your aunts as TT?
No, we just call them, like on my mom's side of the family, Aunt Tricia, Aunt Terry. That's what we do.
Gotcha.
But to my cousins call my mom Aunt Tootie because Tootie
Wait,
is
Aunt what?
Sorry?
I'm sorry, what'd you say they called her what? Aunt what?
Aunt Tootie.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So they call her aunt, but the cousins do. The cousins call her aunt. Or your cousins call her aunt.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Lexi, how about you? How about you, Lexi? Do you refer to anyone in your family as TT?
I do.
Really? Who?
I do. My mom's sister, yeah.
What do you call her?
TT Pat.
And how old are you?
22.
Okay, I remember you doing that at 3. You still do that?
Yeah.
Wow, we're going to have to work on that, okay? All right, let me see. Meg, do you know what cocoa butter is? Have you ever had an occasion for using cocoa butter?
Cocoa butter, I know what it is, but have not used it, no.
And in your experience, at least by, commercials or seeing friends, how should cocoa butter be used?
It's I'm pretty sure it's a bath product, right? Like it's I think, yeah.
No, you're doing good. I use it for Alexi. Have you ever used cocoa butter?
Yeah, I was gonna say I use it for scars.
Oh yes, scars. So some folks use it for scarring. I kicked the heck out of my shin, and it left a huge bruise. And so I use the cocoa butter to kind of make the bruising go away. So and the scarring go away. Mm-hmm. Let me think if there's anything else. Meg, are you familiar with the term when it refers to cooking? Like we had a great food at your house when we were down in New Orleans. Your dad catered from a great place. Are you familiar with the terminology that someone put their foot in something? Like if someone said, "Oh, you put your foot in this gumbo. You put your foot in this po' boy." Is that a phrase you've ever used?
I gotta admit, I've never even heard of that phrase before.
So, Lexi, have you ever used that phrase? Have you ever or heard someone say, "Oh, you put your foot in these greens," or "Put your foot in this gumbo"? Because when we were down one of those meals, I'm trying to think of what it was. It's not etouffee. Mm-hmm. Was it etouffee? Somebody put their foot in an etouffee. What? So Lexi, so this is a black colloquialism. What does it mean to put your foot in something?
Like if somebody really cooks something, it's really good. you'd say that they put their foot in it. Mom says it all the time.
Right.
I don't think I've ever said it.
But your mom says it.
Mom says it all
so
the
Meg,
time.
when something's really good in a lot of black communities, I guess the idea is you put everything you could have put in this to make this good, including your foot. So the highest honor, if you're having a meal and someone says, "Ooh wee," somebody put their foot up in this stew. People start blushing and say, "Oh, thank you. You shouldn't have. No, that's good. That's good. Thank you all for doing it. That's always fun to break ice, and it just helps us to not be nervous. Although the show is laid back and I enjoy it, I find that people are often nervous when they're getting into the studio. And so, Meg, let me just start with you, because your dad and I met. First of all, let me step back and just say this: we were trying to count like the levels of cousinism that we have in our common cousinality in our families. And so as I was writing this out in preparation for this, I realized that you and I are at a different level in our cousinship than your dad and I. For example, our great grandfathers were brothers. And so Robert Lafayette, Gee, and Henderson. Well, Robert Lafayette is your great grandfather. He's your dad's great grandfather, but he's your great grandfather. But his half brother Henderson, who was half black and half Welsh, was my great grandfather. So what's really interesting is then their children were first cousins, depending on how you count it. Like, remember we were having this discussion, is it one cousin once removed? However, what's interesting is you and I come from the same individual, Reuben Gee. We all do at some level. But what's very interesting is that Meg and I can trace our history back and find out that our ancestors were actually siblings, which makes it very, very interesting. And so then, Lexi, you're one generation behind me. But it was very important for me to bring this discussion beyond me and John and our generation to really talk about the next generation who's inheriting this problem of race relations. And so, Meg, just briefly, folks know that I met your dad on Ancestry.com. I've talked about this a lot, but I'm just curious about how he broached the subject with you, how you found out we were coming down, and just your general reaction in finding out that your dad had found black relatives and they were coming down to meet you. Is that the first time you ever had given thought to the idea of having black relatives? Just take a minute, if you could, and just tell us how you were made aware of this Guess Who's Coming to Dinner event.
Well, it's actually kind of funny that you bring that up, because I wasn't aware even that I had ancestors who were slave owners. Because I think I don't remember first learning about slavery. I don't. I think, but I do remember when I was like 5 or 6 years old that I knew about it, or we had maybe talked about it in school. Like, I'm sure we were doing some type of, elementary school history lesson with Dr. King, and I went home and I said, Mommy, Papa, did any of our ancestors own slaves? And they said, no, none of our ancestors, we weren't that kind of people. None of us owned slaves. And so I grew up, I spent the rest of my childhood thinking, yes, I know white people own slaves. Yes, I know that, that's affecting the way things are today. But I had no idea that was any part of our history. Just because, I kind of understand why when, your 5 or 6 year old is asking you this and is kind of scared, that I can kind of understand where they were coming from, but I wish that when I was maybe a little bit older, like maybe, I don't know, like 9 or 10 or 10 or 11, that they had sat me down and had told me that when I was when I was old enough to sort of like grapple with it a little bit.
Sure.
But, they didn't. Like, I think it had never come up again. Like, we had talked about slavery, and of course, as history classes went on, like 7th grade U.S. history, APUSH, like, I knew more about slavery, and I knew what the historic ramifications were, and like what we're still dealing with today. But I usually when I'm at home just for a vacation or something, like right now living in New Orleans, I have my own apartment, but usually I stay with my mom. My parents are divorced, so usually I stay with my mom at her house. But that day, I'd gotten up, and to me it was just a normal day. My mom was talking about, doing something later, like maybe we were going to see a movie. And then my dad called me at about 11, and he said, "Hey, can you go pick up an order at Don Belisi's for me?" Don Belisi's is a popular po' boy place.
Oh, yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Yes. And I remember I was a little, I don't know if I was annoyed, but it was a little bit like, okay, I need to change out of pajamas. And I, went over to get them. So if you look at the pictures from that day, my hair is not brushed. The clothes, I just grabbed the first thing in my closet, put them on, went to go pick up the order, and then was dropping it off. And it's like, oh, there are people here.
So you didn't know we were coming to New Orleans?
I had no idea you were coming. I had no idea.
We didn't know that.
And but cousin Joan was there. My dad's
Sure.
First cousin Joan was there. It was wonderful. And I was like, "Oh, Joan, you're here. Hi, how are you?" And the plan was that I was going to drop off the pool boys and then leave. But my dad was like, "Well, do you want to stay?" And I was a little like, okay, I guess, I'm not going to turn down a shrimp po' boy.
Right.
And then so I sat, we were eating, and I had no idea who y'all were, and it wasn't until...
Wait, hold on. Meg, you didn't think we were to help, though, did you? Please tell me you didn't think we were to help. No, I'm messing with you. I'm messing with you,
yeah.
Meg. So you sat down, and even at lunch, you didn't know, while me and my sister Laleta and Lexi, why we were there. Entirely. You didn't know why we were there.
I had no idea at all. I had no idea. And it wasn't until about maybe 10 minutes into the conversation that I actually put it together and then had to school my face so that it wasn't a surprise or a shock, really.
That's wild. So hold on. So Meg, I'm going to come back to you in just a moment. Lexi, so what did you think about your dad wanting to go down? Because I said, Lexi, I met some relatives and they're G's. I mean, we are blood relatives, and we come from their plantation where we worked, and we didn't just adopt the name because we lived on the plantation. I mean, Reuben sired our family. So what did you think about your dad wanting to go down to New Orleans and have a meal with white Southerners who were kinfolk? Do you remember what you thought about that?
I think at first, when you first told me that you were going to start doing Ancestry.com, I really wasn't surprised because you were always very into genealogy. You always told me you were really interested in it. So I was like, okay, whatever, he's just going to do his thing. And then when you told me that you met Meg's dad and then told me that you wanted to travel to New Orleans, I was I think I was very caught off guard. I definitely was not expecting you to say that. And then I also wasn't expecting you to ask me to go with you. Because I don't know if I thought that it was just going to be your thing. Sure. But I knew that this interest was mainly yours. And so I didn't expect any of it. I think. Sure. And so I think I don't know if I really had expectations for what it was going to be like, because I really didn't have anything to go off of. I think I was nervous, but you seemed somewhat sure of what you were going into, so I think that made me I trust you, so I think that made it less nerve-wracking maybe. But it definitely caught me off guard for sure.
Definitely. So Meg, I never knew until just now that you were delivering the po' boys and that you weren't gonna say. And I remember your hair looking fine, so I don't remember the bad head. So you're sitting down there, and then you're probably hearing me and your dad talk about RLG, and they were brothers, and I remember at one point we got some some paper, like large construction paper or something, and start writing down the family tree. So what was your initial reaction, Meg, when you found out, wait a minute, these are relatives. It did extend from slavery. And we'll get to the slavery part in just a moment. But do you remember what you thought when it clicked? Wait, these are relatives of ours. What was, like, tell me about that aha.
So when it clicked, it was like, oh, these are our relatives. Oh, not my entire life is a lie, but oh, I am descended from a slave owner. Like, my own family, like, actually owned people as property. And it was, I mean, we're going to go back to, what slavery is since, but I remember it was kind of like that was sort of my progression of thought, was like, oh, we're relatives. Oh, we're, like, my ancestor was a slave owner. And then I immediately thought of Thomas Jefferson and his...
Oh, Sally...
Sally Hemings. I don't want to call it a relationship, but because
sure.
that's, that misconstrues what it was. But his... I don't even know what to call that. His persistent abuse and rape of Sally Hemings. And that was sort of where I went to, because that was something where I was like, it was horrifying that he put this young woman through this, but it was still always kind of like, oh, that's something in a textbook. That's something in a history book. And that's something that's, that's awful, but it's not really related to me. Like, there was kind of a disconnect, like, listening to it and learning about it, learning that history, but still in a way being removed from that history.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but this was like learning, and I knew that wasn't the only instance, I wasn't ignorant to that. I knew that it happened like all the time. And, I had seen 12 Years a Slave, which was an incredible film, by the way, but, it was like, I knew that it happened regularly. I knew that was not the only instance. I knew that it was widespread, but it was still just kind of like, oh, this is the first time that, this is really connected to me.
Sure.
And then doing the family tree, I think it was...
And we did that right at the table. We did that right there at the table, too. We just got our paper and started writing down our relationship. Uh-huh.
Right. We did that right at the table. And finding out that you and I were third cousins, that was the moment where I was like, oh, this is recent history.
Right.
Like,
it's not ancient at all.
Like, when you think of, 1800s, it was a while ago. It's like, no, the fact that Alex and I are only third cousins, like, this is really recent. Like, we are really closely related.
Right. That, oh my gosh, yeah, you're right. That was I remember feeling stunned about as we talked through this. And Lexi, do you remember at that same day, I've said this before, but this is while the whole Charlottesville event was going on. But because we were so in tune to Family Talk and the Po' Boys and Etouffee, we weren't really watching. It was really when someone said, you got to take a look at what's happening on social media. So Lexi, tell me just a little bit about the juxtaposition of where we're sitting down with white relatives and counting like how far away we are from Reuben G., who was a slave owner. And then you've got white men in Charlottesville basically saying the country was taken from them. So talk to me a little bit about that dissidence.
Yeah,
Lexi.
It felt like it was almost like a disturbing irony. Like it was a very, we kind of felt like some sort of parallel. Like, I feel like we, as family, were like having this discussion that was definitely painful, but I felt like the context of the conversation made a difference. Versus, I don't know, just like, and I honestly, like, my mind gets really fuzzy around the Charlottesville stuff because it's just really disturbing.
Sure.
But it seemed like such a stark difference.
Right.
Like the energy surrounding it is so clearly different. And so I think that's what makes it even more disturbing. Like, I feel like we were almost in this bubble of like learning so much about our own history
within our own family.
Right. And then like to just find out about what's happening in Charlottesville was like so shocking. not only because it's a horrifying thing that's shocking in and of itself, but I think we were so absorbed in finding out what we were finding out, especially within the slavery context of it. And then to find out that there's these guys who are being like, oh, the country is being taken away from us, whatever.
Right. And we're tracing our family back to what's happened in our own bloodline for almost 200 years.
Exactly.
Let me take this to another level, or for another question. Lexi, recently Ancestry.com was lambasted because they were trying to depict white slave owners or white men in the early 19th century as being in love with these black women. That they have these forbidden love affairs, like a Nicholas Sparks movie or book or something, and they own these women. So tell me about the audacity. I'm going to come to you next, Meg, but tell me about the audacity, Lexi, of Ancestry.com trying to change American history of slavery into some forbidden love affair where these white men were in love with their chattel property.
There are so many, that's horrifying on so many levels. But the first thing that comes to my head is that situations in which you are scared to say no, or it would make you unsafe in any way to say no, is obviously a situation in which you can't consent. And there's no way that slaves and slave owners have a consensual relationship. There's just no, within the power dynamics alone, it makes it impossible for...
By definition, it's a power differential.
It literally makes it impossible for enslaved women to consent to having relationships with these men who definitely were not with these women for any reason other than power. It is very much a power structure. We were talking about in your history class, I think Dr. Clark Pujara said that the children would get the rights of their mother. Right. And so they were making a point of raping enslaved women because then they would have enslaved children. It was totally a power move. It was profitable for them to do that. And so to try and phrase it as if it was romantic, which it was an extremely violent relationship. Right. In every way. There's no to frame that as romance is harmful not just in the power dynamic, but in terms of violence. Innately, it would be a violent relationship. But it's just, I don't think I can even really wrap my head around it because that's so, that's such a sick retelling of history that doesn't make any sense.
And all of that just to sell more Ancestry.com kits. Right. Or ads. Let me push this a little further because you and I really haven't talked about this, and then I have another question. I have a question for Meg on the end of it. That must have had a crazy impact on society. I mean, let me just back up and say this. At some point, the transatlantic slave trade was illegalized. So you couldn't do that legally. So then you have this proliferation of white men raping black women. So they're creating slaves. You know what I mean? So they're producing them. So they're not just going to Africa to get them. But they're creating children. They're creating slaves who will be their children. Yeah, so it's a crazy retelling of history that these women who had no voice. And so now the way we pay homage to black women who held it together for the families, who knew that their babies could be sold from them, they're now having their history retold, which again is the sexualization, I think, of black women and all of this craziness. But it's just a very sick retelling, of that story. And I just can't believe Ancestry.com went there. I hope somebody from Ancestry.com is listening to this. I would love you to come back and say something. Hey, I hope you're enjoying this segment of Black Like Me. I want to take this moment to tell you about something new that we're adding to the Black Like Me experience. I've added a Patreon page. Yeah, that's right. Patreon.com/Black Like Me. It allows me to really connect with the listeners more. As I've been traveling the last few months, I am meeting so many strangers who are telling me how this show is having an impact not only on their personal perspectives and lives, but their professional lives. And that means a lot to me. So we've created a number of tiers, and I think you'll like this: cream of wheat, grits, grits with salt level, grits with sugar, grits with shrimp and cheese, a black icebreaker level. They give folks a variety of choices depending upon what you can afford. But what it allows me to do, depending on the level, where I will shout out your name on one of the shows. Another level allows us to have quarterly interactions on a private Facebook page. And there's another level that allows me to FaceTime with listeners individually to talk to you about what's going on in my world and in the studio and what's coming up. It's really exciting. We've been able to offer a great show to you for the past 2 years, and we want to maintain that level of professionalism while adding a few new things that I can't quite tell you yet. But please go to patreon.com/blacklikeMe and help us take the show to another level. Meg, a question I want to ask you is okay, so when we retell these stories, it's, what it tries to do is it tries to soften the image of the white male slave owner, that he really loved these folks. But so I'm often asking Lexi to put herself, or black women, to put yourself in the shoes of these black women. But I want to put you, Meg, for just a moment in the shoes of the white women who are married to the white men, who are having children by these to these black women. So let's just say, let's get all, Nicholas Spark on it. So let's just say they loved each other. It's still demeaning white women. It's still showing a disregard of his vows to the white woman. So there's no way you really know this. And I studied African-American history, and we don't really talk about this, but how do you imagine that having an impact on white women and their worth and their value, and understanding that their husbands are having these other separate lives and families? Could you just speak into that hypothetically, Meg?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I don't know. I feel like I think that, obviously it's just like so horrifying and disgusting. It's hard even for me to not view that the rape is happening. But I think that in that time, rape wasn't considered as such. Mm-hmm. Like it was just something that happened. And I think that if I had been in that position, I think that, obviously I would have married a man because that was expected of me, not necessarily, I was in love with someone, so I married them. But I think that I would have seen it as maybe more turning a blind eye. Mm-hmm. I think I would have tried to not think about it, not because it was rape, but just sort of like thinking, I'm the wife, I'm the one that he actually shares a bed with, or a bedroom. I think I would have tried to turn a blind eye, but also kind of like, the children that I bore him, those are quote unquote his real children. Right. I think I wouldn't have. I'm just trying to think, because it's so like horrifying.
And it's convoluted.
That's a very honest answer, though.
It's very honest, and in some ways it victimizes the white women, but it also makes her complicit in slavery too.
Right.
It's different rules, so it's not like you're going to divorce and go, it was a different time. It wasn't like you're going to divorce because he was unfaithful and then take part of the land. However, I'm building this for you, I'm doing this. So in some ways she's complicit in being quiet, because she does get to benefit from the life of the resources that come from slavery, but she's being victimized as well. And I think where I really want to go with the question is, and I noticed this very starkly in 12 Years Slave. I've only seen it once, and that's all I can stomach to see it. Yeah. I felt that's very powerful, but it probably was one of the most truest depiction of what I think slavery would be like. And there's not very often that I see things that just really traumatize me, and that was traumatizing. But we know that slavery and the rape of black women put an even wider wedge between what was going on with black men and white men. But what we rarely talk about is where did the wedge start with white women and black women? Because often when we think of race relations, we think about white men in power, white men on Wall Street, white men in Hollywood, or youth or young people protesting like in Charlottesville. But we hardly really have the image of white women and her role in really bringing things to light or really speaking out on racism. And so I'm just curious if you two could just briefly, because I got like some other questions I want to ask you, if you can briefly, again, hypothesize, because, you know, you're not necessarily historians, but just let's look at what do we think the impact of those slave relationships, the mistress and the wife, on black women and white women relationships, which in my opinion are not very great. Not that they're great with black men and white men, but between military and sports, we have an occasion to sort of get together and rough it up a little bit and high five. I don't really see the social interaction between black women and white women that I do with black men and white men, although it may be on a very surface level. But I'm curious if you think that could stem somehow from these relationships, this triangulated relationship between this white slave owner, his white wife, and then his black slave. Either one of you could just jump in. Your thoughts about what impact you think that may have had on black and white women relationships that might still have some residual impact today?
Meg, do you want to go first? Do you want me to go first?
I don't really necessarily have an answer right now, so
And that's a tough question. Yeah.
You can go first if you want to, because I'm not even sure.
Sure.
I think I need to chew on it for a
Sure.
second, like think about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the first thing that comes to my head is thinking about, and I guess this is more about women of color broadly, but within my own experience as a black woman, I think the concept of intersectionality is the first thing that comes to my head.
Tell me more about that.
I think that, I mean, there are obvious, there's obviously privilege that men have that women do not have. Like that gap is obviously there.
Sure.
But I think that white women have had their role in climbing the ladder and haven't brought women of color with them or other marginalized women with them. And I think in part that could stem from a resentment that comes from that context of being a white wife and knowing that your husband is sleeping with black women.
And having black children
Right, and having
with them.
black children. And I think that could create a sort of resentment that may have lingered for longer than anticipated. Like I think that white women and black women specifically have always had a tumultuous history because it's been very complicated. Like I think even in the suffrage movement, when white women were getting their rights to vote and they didn't want black women to have that.
And they were motivated actually on how to organize based upon what they saw Sojourner Truth and other black women doing for racial equality. They kind of took note and just said, wait a minute, we're gonna let all of these folks get rights and we're not voting. And so you're right, the suffrage movement, according to what we've been hearing about history, was shaped, or if at the very least motivated by the community organizing that was witnessed through trying to heal the racial rift in the community. So Lexi, so you're saying that as white women came into power and created movements, they were bringing white women along. I mean, plain as simple, they were bringing white women along.
I just noticed this very similar thread throughout history, and I feel like that would be a very understandable point for that to start. And I think that that's why intersectionality as a concept is so important now, because it hasn't been implemented any time in the past.
Got you. No, got you. So white men were in power. Black men were pushing to get rights to vote and own land. But again, they were still married to women who didn't have rights, black or white didn't have rights. Then white women began to rise through the abolition movement or the suffrage movement. And so really, black women and women of color were left behind. White men had power. Black men were elected to Congress, at the turn of the 20th century. Black women were not. They were married to them, but they didn't come into that power. They were not landowners because that's not the way things were structured. Then, around the 1919, 1920, white women come into power, and then black women are still left out. And so, Meg, I guess I want to switch to you. And again, all this is hypothetical because because I didn't really write this down to some of the questions because I just think it's coming up now because you two are such an enigma because you're descendants from the same plantation, the same family. You're both Gees. And so to have a black woman and a white woman talking about intersectionality and womanhood and you're related is really, really unique. I don't think I've ever seen this or heard people talk about this. And so Meg, can you just chime in a little bit about maybe why you think or how you think white women disregarded the concept of intersectionality as they began to rise and didn't look to their black sisters or sisters of color to come up the ladder with them?
Yeah, well, the fight for women's suffrage is something that I did learn about from a young age because my mother's a lawyer.
Sure.
And she was very much a product of, because she went to Harvard for law school. She went to the local university for undergrad, but then got a law degree at Harvard in the early 80s, which was very much when the second wave feminism had taken hold, and it wasn't necessarily bra burning at the time, but it was that was very much what she grew up with. So, or not grew up with, but that shaped her worldview. So, and she was one of the first female partners at her firm, and she was working the entire time that I was growing up, and she still is a very powerful lawyer. So that was something that I knew about. I knew women didn't always have the right to vote, and that we didn't, that it was something that we really had to fight for. But I think that I do know that at the time, in the 1850s and 60s, after the war, that the main members of the women's suffrage movement were, of course, white, and that they were very, very opposed to black men. It was like black women weren't even a factor. It was just that the 15th Amendment was such a slap in the face that, they're going to give N-words the right to vote, but they're not going to give it to us. They see,
right.
Because women who were, grown women in that time, they would have grown up thinking that, black men and women weren't even humans. So it was like a slap in the face. I can't believe they're giving them people who they didn't even view as human. They're giving them the right to vote,
and forgetting about us.
And they're not even giving it to us. They're saying that almost we're not human, really. And so I feel through all of that, it was if they advocated for black women, it was, I don't think it's something that even occurred to them. I think that they just thought, if we support black women having the right to vote with us, then we're supporting black men also having the right to vote. And that was inconceivable to them,
sure.
I think. And so it's something that even to this day that has persisted, where when you think of someone being disenfranchised or being part of a marginalized group, I think that society on the whole tends to, or white society or white men, I think, tend to view white women and black men more as being in, more as being the same level, I think. I think that the intersectionality of it is just, I think that it's something where it's I don't know. I think that black women are just almost overlooked. And I think that that's, kind of, not kind of, I think it is disgusting. And I think that it is ignoring what did this come from. But it was also when Hillary Clinton was the nominee and people are it's such a great step forward for women. It was well, it's a step forward for white women, let's be clear, even though, she's been very public about the fact that she would never consider it, even though a lot of people were thinking at the same time Hillary was nominated, dream candidate, I would love Michelle Obama to run for president, even though, she's been very public. She's done with politics.
Right, I bet she is.
But yeah, I just think that everyone was saying this is such a step forward for white women. And even though part of me was like, yeah, this is great. And I like Hillary Clinton. I've always liked her. But I was kind of thinking, well, but then what about, what about black women? I feel like people are ignoring the fact that that's still something that hasn't happened.
Sure. And I mean, this is why I asked you both to be on the show, but even as we're talking, I'm realizing how rich this is. And so, Meg, let me just put you on the spot again for just a moment. So then what's the message to white women about the importance of intersectionality, particularly as it pertains to race? Not that it's not important across the board, because it really is. But I think sometimes if we make it really broad, and I understand by definition the word intersectionality should mean broad, but I think sometimes the race relations opportunities they slip through the cracks. And again, when I'm on here talking about power structures, we're often talking about the president, CEOs. We are often picturing white men needing to release power. But there are a lot of white women who wield power, particularly in the nonprofit world where I live and where I work. And so I'm going to ask Lexi the same question, but I want to start with you, Meg. A large part of our listenership are folks who are white, and many of them are women. Can you take 15 minutes and just say something to white women in considering the fact that if we're not careful, we're going to repeat this past experience of the lack of intersectionality? And then I'm going to ask Lexi the same question, to what she would say to white women. Well, what do you say to your white sisters, Meg, who are in places of power, politicians, teachers, presidents of universities, but they haven't really thought about their role in intersectionality when it comes to race? What message would you give those women?
I think the first thing that I would say is wake up. And that's
wake the hell up, sister.
Yeah, that's the not profane version that I kind of wanted to say. But I think it is like wake up, because the power that white women have, even though we gain it through, like, so often white women who get power, we gain it through complicity. We get it through being complicit to this kind of racism. And I think just, realize that. And also, I don't want to say white women have been given the gift of power. Like, I think we need to stop thinking of it as a gift from white men, because I feel like we do tend to think of it like that.
Sure.
So I think that we need to don't think of it as a gift. Think of it as, no, this is something I worked for and I fought for. But also, I think that you need to also spread the power around to Black women, Latina women,
Sure.
Native American women, Asian women. I think that it's just something where it's like, we have worked so hard for power, but it doesn't really mean anything if we can't say that we're fighting for equality or we're fighting for equity unless we are including everyone in that. And I think that it's so easy to backslide if we don't realize that there are other women, non-white women, who are working just as hard as we are, and yet we've gotten ahead of them.
Sure. That's really, really important, particularly. And then, Lexi, don't forget the question. I'm coming to you in just a moment. But my sister does a lot of work with young African American girls, Latino girls who are survivors of sexual assault and sexual abuse. There's a huge Me Too movement, and the hashtag Me Too, it needs to happen. But when you consider the fact that rape has happened to African American women for almost half a millennium, for 400 years, repeated rape, that no one considered this a very serious thing, as more white women, particularly wealthy, resourced, powerful women in Hollywood. But I'm not really hearing them talk about the atrocity of this on our nation, particularly as it pertains to our, to our Black community. We talk about what Black people do to each other, but we never really talk about the impact of white rape and violence on black families has caused us. So Lexi, your question. Let me ask you this. I'm gonna challenge you just a little bit. You've got friends who are white women. Do you think they ever think about the intersectionality or your deep desire for them to understand privilege they have and how they need to understand the world of their friend who happens to be African American?
Definitely. And I think they're scared to ask about it.
Tell me more about that.
I think that they're worried that if they say something, like, they're going to feel painfully aware of the racial difference. Which is like nothing I'm ever unaware of.
Sure.
But I think that they're worried that if we talk about race, that it's going to somehow implicate the friendship, like that somehow things are going to be ruined. And I think that they're also worried that they're going to be requiring me to educate them.
And is that a role you want or don't want?
I think it's very different when it's my friends. When it's people I'm willing to put that kind of emotional labor into because it's relationships I value. I think it's very different than trying to have a conversation with somebody in the classroom where it's like, I don't know you. I have no reason to expend this kind of emotional energy on somebody that I have no investment in. But I think when it's my friends, I think it's honestly more important. But I think that they're scared to approach that subject because I think in part they know it's going to be uncomfortable, but I think they're also like, well, I don't want you to have to do that. Like, I don't want to ask that of you. Which is fair. But I think that if it were anybody else, I would be less willing. But if these are people that I love, and like am willing to not only have hard conversations with, but I'm willing to challenge, I think that makes a difference.
And do you feel the pressure to not be more vocal on those things because of the pressure it puts on them? And does that put more pressure on black women to take care of white women?
I don't think I thought of it that way. But maybe.
I mean, like if your friends say, hey, let's go see Ariana Grande or let's go see Demi Lovato. Those are artists that you like. You even, turned me on to some of them with their good songs. But if you said, hey, Beyonce's doing a Lemonade tour and she's going to be in Chicago, let's go. Is there a likelihood that your friends would think, kind of like the spoof that was going around the internet? Did you see Beyonce at the Super Bowl? She's not for us. That video's not for us. Like she's talking about Black Power and she had an afro and a black outfit. It's not for us anymore. How willing do you think your friends are to sort of enter into that world and that venue where she's talking about where you're not having to lay out the information, but maybe an artist is? How willing do you think your friends are to venture into those spaces with you?
I hope that they would be willing.
Sure.
I don't know. I think that they would. I think and hope that they would be willing. I think that they would expect that it would be followed by a conversation. But I also hope that my friends have enough taste to go to a Beyonce concert and not pass that up.
Sure, right. They're white, but they're not crazy. Yes, Meg.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, someone asked me if I want to go to Beyonce performing Lemonade Live. I would jump at the chance.
I would hope any of my friends would.
Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to interject there's no question about whether or not I would want to go.
No, definitely. Hey, I've got, I think, maybe 1 to 2 more questions. And it's this. So what does the healing of the racial rift, what does this look like? Of course, we've messed it up for the last 400 years. But, you two are educated, middle-class women. You're related. You've got Gee and hold on, I got to pause. I got to say that again, Eli. Okay. You both you're middle-class, educated women. You're black. You know, cousin Meg is white. You got G blood and Wilder blood. You know, we're double cousins because we've got two families flowing through, which is really, really interesting. So I just want to just say the message that you and Meg, I'm saying this, Meg, because I'm looking at Lexi, the message that you two could have to the world about the role of intersectionality and where black women and white women have missed it has the potential to be very, very powerful. So just something for you all to think about. But as we look at how we get traction for your generation, you know, it feels like your dad's generation, my generation have said, hey, we're related and we're not freaked out about it. It's different. It's kind of odd. But it comes up in conversation that I have white relatives and we're getting to know each other and we're really liking each other. We haven't really taken a deep dive into the toughness of the topic, but we're broaching it. We're getting into it more and more. But I know 20 years from now, we don't want this to be as awkward as it has been. So I would just ask each of you, what does the future look like, and how do we measure success? And Meg, I'll start with you, and then Lexi, I'll finish up with you. You know, what are your hopes for black women and white women specifically in building better relationships with each other? We know we have a whole, you know, black white community, but since you all are, you know, I want to ask you your perspective as black and white women. What does success look like, and what could some possible next steps look like? Meg?
Yeah, well, I think that Lexi, I completely agree with her when she said, we need to have those conversations. I think that just recognizing that it happened and then taking actions in that direction is really the most important thing. Like having those conversations and not being afraid to have those conversations. Mm-hmm. Because I think that even in my generation, sometimes there are women, especially not just in the South, because I feel like the South gets a lot of blame, and it's not right. It's not just white women in the South, but I think that there's still a lot of complicity. And when someone says, "Oh, you know, you have privilege," I feel like people get defensive. Like, you know, I don't know if there's someone who's, you know, also gay, and it's like, "Oh, well, I don't have privilege. You know, I'm gay," or "I don't have privilege. I'm disabled." Sure. But I think that it's like, I think it's acknowledging that, yes, you know, this happened and it's a awful history, but I think that you can't, it's like, you know, this is this comparison pales in, you know, advance, but it's like, okay, if you get a scrape on your knee, it's not going to heal if you just ignore it. Or like if you break your leg, it's not going to heal if you just ignore it. It's like you need to recognize, okay, this leg is broken. I need to go to the doctor. They need to put it in a cast, you know, or they need to set it and then put it in a cast so that it can heal. So I think that we need to recognize that this history happened. We can't just say, oh, we've moved past it, because we have not at all. And I think that having those conversations and also saying, like, working to be allies, but being active allies, like, okay, you know, what can I do in this situation? You know, like asking Black women, okay, you know, what is something that would help in this way? You know,
sure. And
what
and the flip of that could be, and the flip of that, Meg, could be also talking to powerful white women like your mother and ask, as you made strides, your Harvard law grad. I mean, that's the summit of a legal experience, legal training. Right. But I think also having the conversation, what moments did we as powerful white women miss by leaving our sisters behind? Because you're in a really an enviable position. I mean, you want to be careful, because no one would take you serious if you said, hey, I have Black relatives, let me talk about reparations, and let me talk about race relations. Right. But at the same time, you do have Black relatives, and you can say something that Aurelia, your great grandmother, this is my great grandmother was Venus, yours was Aurelia. They both had children by Reuben Gee. But there are things that Aurelia couldn't say, your great-grandmother, your great-grandmother, and perhaps even your grandmother couldn't say. But now you got voice and opportunity, and you're not hiding the fact that you have Black relatives who share DNA with you. And so I think you're in a place where you can ask that question of African American women, but you can also very pointedly have a discussion with your mother and other white women and just say,
Right.
what were we thinking? I'm not trying to demonize you, but what were we thinking by not bringing our black sisters along? What was the threat? Because if we're going to really heal race relations, we've got to address what caused them in the first place. And it was that fear of being passed up or superseded by black men and black women that really made white women say we're going to protect ourselves because no one else is looking out for us. But you have a real powerful platform. You may not think of it that way, but I'd like to encourage you to do that because you can engage white women and black women while still using the platform that I have met black relatives and we're third cousins and we can name our ancestors and we get to set the record straight in a way that it wasn't set straight when Venus was raped in 1846 and had Henderson in 1847. There's actually something we can do 150, 60 years later that can right those deeds in our family. And that's something that's really interesting. So Lex, let me ask you, what does it mean to move forward? What do you want your black sisters to know? What do you want your white sisters to say? What opportunities do you and Meg have, perhaps by being related and the descendants of such atrocity, but you have an ability to do something redemptive with it because you have power and privilege and education and things as well. So what are some of your parting thoughts?
I think the conversation piece is really vital, but
between
I think,
black and white women.
Yes, but I think more importantly, for white women to let women of color have a voice. I think it's very easy to dominate a conversation, and I think it's really important that white women take time to listen and really pay attention to what women of color are saying, and to stand with us.
Sure.
With what we're asking for.
With the agenda you're setting.
Right. Because I think that's a really big part of being an active ally is standing with us for our agenda and not creating your own. So I think that's a really, really big piece that isn't talked about very much. I'm trying to think.
I agree. And yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So Lexi, I'm curious, for so long, Venus and then the wives of her son, because she had only one son that we know of, that's Henderson. But so many times black women were just silent because they didn't have a voice, their personhood wasn't recognized. How heavy is the responsibility to speak up on things, important things that women traditionally in your family have not been able to? Do you without fear of some type of retaliation, do you think about the weightiness of being able to voice things that perhaps Venus, your great grandmother, couldn't say?
Yeah. It's very difficult, I think. I think it's a difficult thing to discern and then to be able to voice. I think that the concept of intergenerational trauma is really valid.
Sure.
There.
Sure.
Because I think it's really easy to be like, I'm feeling something and I don't know what it is or why I'm feeling it. And then the more that you learn about history, I think it contextualizes it in a way that makes you be like, oh, this is something that I'm feeling that people like me have felt for generations.
Sure.
And that, like, this has followed a bloodline.
Sure. What I'm hoping for you, Lexi, I'm sorry, did I cut you off?
No.
What I hope for you and Meg is that you're able to continue to have honest conversations about race in America, because I think it's hard to move forward if we're not processing history, and I think that it's just important to have places where you can just speak and share things. Like, for example, Meg, when I met your family, I enjoyed meeting them, but because I'm a student of history, I'm still thinking. Folks would think that because John and I are both, educated men, Big Ten educated men, you finished grad school, Lexi starting grad school, like, oh, thank God, slavery did not ruin the Gees and their descendants. However, there's lots of access. Lexi, you can vote. There's things we can do. However, in terms of society and how it views folks, we have not yet all arrived. And so there are days in our dialogue where I want to say, wow, there's a disparity of wealth, but I don't want anything from you either. I remember, like, I don't think your dad knows this, man. He's going to know it now because he's going to hear it. But when your dad came to visit us, I mean, Jackie and I did not have a child until 8 years into our marriage, so we didn't have daycare and stuff like that. So we were able to save money, and we have a decent place where we live. But I remember my wife said to me after your dad visited us, "I'm so glad that John came here because I want him to know you don't need anything from him." And so even as we're talking about how we move ahead, there's still some undercurrent in Black thought. Well, I don't want our white relatives to think we're trying to come and get an acre and 40 acres and a mule, but we're still aware of the racial disparity and the economic disparity, but we're not expecting descendants to fix that. But at the same time, we're very aware of it. But there's a hesitation that if we go into that, it might stir up some things like, well, are they trying to get their claim on something? And so I just think moving forward means having occasional conversations about history, but not being stuck there. But I'm hoping in your generation, it won't be awkward to talk about those things. Like you and Lexi can talk about the rape of Venus, but also the total disregard of Aurelia, who was married to Reuben. You all can really talk about that, and even the wealth disparity and how it's happened. Like, I think it's sometimes when people have the conversation, like, how did your family, like, how did your brand of G's get your wealth? Like, what do you trace it back to, and where did we pick ours up? Because my mother and father were sharecroppers. Not that we want to get stuck there, but to move ahead, I think just the knowledge that was really the American history, because then it won't make it seem as if others just pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, and then the other side were just sort of shiftless and lazy and didn't have goals. I think understanding the wealth of America and how wealth is generated, particularly around whites and kept away from Blacks, is just an important starting place as we move ahead. Not because we want anything from the past, but I think understanding how we got to where we are is going to really help America move better and to get better traction and moving ahead. And I think our family epitomizes the American story. So what's really rich about me and John and Meg, you and Lexi, is that what we're talking about just as G's is really the story of America. And I think the more we understand each other, the more we understand America. And I'm crazy enough to think that our family might be in a very unique place to help America to look at its history, its sin, and its future. And so not to put extra weight on your shoulders, but I'm hopeful that you all will be able to take this further than perhaps what your dad and I where your dad and I have been able to take it, Meg.
Yeah, no, it's weight that I gladly accept. Like it's something that I want to continue with, and I want to continue listening and learning, and also putting my own voice forward.
Definitely. It's important to us, but it'll also help to free white women as well in understanding that they have a role in this, and it helps them to be a little bit more, authentic. But I think we also need to see Black women and white women working together, but we got to name the elephant in the room and why we aren't. And so absolutely. This has been very powerful. I hope that you've enjoyed it. Meg, I appreciate you staying in touch since our visit, dialing in. Lexi, I know you've got to scoot to work soon, so I'm glad that you came in. I am glad, Meg, that our families have gotten to know each other. I've been talking with your dad, and so I'm trying to find a few dates to get down to New Orleans again just to check up on him to see how he's doing. I'll be sure to give you a heads up because I'd love to do it I'd love to do it at a time when you're around. And I want us to keep pushing through into our lineage and getting to know each other. And my big dream is that one day we bring more Black G's and white G's together to just talk and connect and move ahead. I just think we become more whole as we understand our full story. And as awkward and as unpopular as it is, we are family. And we have an opportunity to really model what it means to move ahead in a very powerful way. So thank you to women for being a part of the show. Your strength, your honesty, the intellect, it was able just to shine through. And I know you've given our folks a lot to think about. So Everyone, this has been another very exciting episode of Black Like Me with Dr. Alex Gee. As my guest, I've had my third cousin, Meg Roy. Again, our great-great-grandparents were siblings. And my daughter, Lexi Gee, on the show. And we know that you've gotten some great insight. So take this information, share it. You know someone who really wants to listen in on this, so put it out there. And please, any comments you have, thoughts you have, suggestions, tweet out at us, write us on Facebook. We'd love to entertain your insight and your questions. Have a great day, and thank you for being a part of the Black Like Me podcast family. I want to thank Corey Saffold for creating the music for this podcast, my podcast manager, Tyler Nyland, my engineer and editor, Eli Steenlich, my editor, Jeremy Holiday, and a special thank you to WORT Studios, where we record Black Like Me.